Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Thursday, July 25th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Akron game in 37 days, the game against Michigan in 128 days, 2 days of Big Ten Media Days now in the books, which would normally mean we would be in the car and headed back to Columbus. But, well, welcome to the brave new world of 2024 Big Ten football. There are 3 days of this event now, so we're only 2/3 of the way through. But, boy, it was another very, very interesting day. Lots of different stuff to talk about. Some of my favorite people to listen to talk about football and to ask questions. Got Matt Rule, James Franklin, got the new college football playoff executive director. Got a chance to talk to him. Some really, really interesting stuff today. I guess we were kind of running a bunch of different directions. There was a lot of stuff happening. So there was a bunch of people you talked to that I really didn't get a chance to talk to. So let's start with Matt Rule. You said that he had some interesting stuff to talk about in terms of roster management, coach management, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the ability to have more coaches on the field now. A lot of the coaches here were being asked about all of the changes. Mm-hmm. You know, whether it's scholarship limits, the coaching changes, but this one is everybody that you can have unlimited coaches basically. But the thing is, you don't want unlimited coaches because it's the whole too many cooks in the kitchen type of thing. So their plan right now is to have 2 coaches for every position. So, 2 defensive line coach, 2 coaches, 2 receivers coaches. And he explained it in a way where they've got, on the defensive line, they've got a 5th-year guy who should be taking, like graduate level courses. And they're bringing in a freshman who is still learning how to play American football, that he said. So it's like, to teach these 2 guys the same thing isn't necessarily fair to either one of them. Mm-hmm. It reminds me of like the one-room schoolhouse thing, where you've got high school kids and first graders type of thing. And so they hope to split that up. And we see that at various positions forever. Like at Texas Tech would have outside receivers, inside receivers under Mike Leach. Mm-hmm. Some teams have defensive end coach and some have defensive tackle coach together. He's looking to do that for everybody just to help split up the youth and the veterans in one way.
And that's, in case you're wondering what changed about coaches, the NCAA ended the countable coaches rule. That ended, I think, late June. They signed off on that finally, where you used to have the 10 countable assistants, and those are the only ones who are allowed to do on-field instruction and, certain stuff like when there's a football on the field. There were just restrictions on that. That's all gone now. So functionally, you have an unlimited number of coaches if you want it. I don't think anyone's going to have 275 on-field coaches. That will be probably some overkill, but I think people are sort of still figuring out where they want to fall on that spectrum between 10 and 275. One of my other favorite coaches to talk to every year is James Franklin. And James Franklin is he's very honest. Yeah. He's very open. He's got a pretty good sense of humor. I know that people have a view of him based on his game management. People have a view based on him, on some of his. He was asked about the, good team, great team, elite team. And the reporter said, you had that rant a couple of years ago. And he's like, I would characterize it as a speech and not a rant, which is just kind of like dryly funny. But he had a couple different interesting things to say. I was only get over there for like 5-10 minutes and had 2 different things, very distinct things that I posted clips of on Twitter because it was like, well, this is really interesting. One was about the whiteout and would they do a whiteout for the college football playoff game if they had home game. He had an interesting answer on that. He also had a really, really interesting answer on the headsets and, the helmet radios. And, he went into sort of, this was designed to solve the problem of sign stealing, but then said like, well, it might not actually completely do that.
Yeah, it solves it in one aspect where the coaches don't have to sign anything in necessarily, but the sign still has to get from the quarterback to the receivers if you're not huddling. And so there's still going to be there would still be hand signals if you're doing a no huddle where, sure, the quarterback gets it into his helmet, but then he's got to relay it to somebody 20 yards away. So how are you going to do that? You're not going to yell it. You're going to do the hand signals there. So he said it doesn't really eliminate that. You could do some huddling. I think Ryan Day has talked about the expectations. There will be some huddling. Kirk Ferentz has talked about that, surprisingly. I know you're shocked by that.
I think of them as such a no-huddle, up-tempo team. That's so strange.
But he did say that he thinks they could have a pretty good offense this year. But you do the huddling aspect of it if you want. But there's still going to be some up-tempo because it's still an advantage for the offense to go up-tempo. So when you do you're going to have hand signals there. And of course, you're always going to have hand signals defensively from secondary on up. So it's a nice thought, and it's one way to eliminate some of it, but it's if you're trying to eliminate it completely, you're not going to do that.
No. And, you're never going to solve everything. It may make it better. And, you may have teams used to have teams going up tempo to throw the defense off. Now you might be going huddle to throw the defense off.
Change up. It's an off-speed type of thing. One other thing from James Franklin, he saw a reporter in the crowd wearing a Buckeyes visor, and he mentioned the visor, and the guy was like, "I can get you one." And Franklin was like, "Yeah, I don't think that would go over well with the Wawa and the Sheets people in Pennsylvania," so he declined.
You forget, sir, that I live in the convenience store state. That's what it says right on the license plate. Yeah, he is always an entertaining guy to talk to. He was talking about the fact that it's the helmet stripe game for the Ohio State game, not the whiteout game this year. We have been sort of reading tea leaves on a lot of this stuff and been telling you for a month or two now. We're pretty sure the Penn State game is going to be a day game. We're pretty sure the Oregon game is going to be a primetime game. It feels like no one is willing to say that officially yet, but I feel like everyone we talk to here is sort of under the same impression. I talked to James Crepia, from the Oregonian, who covers Oregon. That interview was already posted on our board, the Huddle board, presented by Jeff Ruby Steakhouse at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Did 3 season preview episodes, one with Iowa, one with Oregon, one with Michigan, talking to writers who cover those teams. Really, really interesting stuff. You can find that all for our members at BuckeyeHuddle.com. But when I was talking to James Crepia, who covers Oregon, he said, everyone has basically all but told him it is going to be a primetime game. They're doing a blackout in the crowd. They're wearing their new black jerseys. So he said, they're probably not going to do that if they think that's a noon local kick. So that's a pretty good indication on that, because I know that's one of those things that people ask us about all the time. So something else people ask us about all the time, the college football playoff. We have been doing a bunch of shows on that because it's so new and so different, and sort of figuring out what that might look like. But we always had these questions about, okay, well, is Ohio State guaranteed, if they win the Big Ten, guaranteed to be the team that gets, the 2 seed or the 1 seed or whatever that gets assigned to the Rose Bowl, or could that change? Could that change based on geography or whatever? Got a chance. I pulled Rich Clark, the college football playoff executive director, off to the side for a few minutes after he spoke this morning. I got a chance to ask him a couple of those questions. The conference tie-ins with the bowls, those contracts are still in effect. So the Big Ten champion is going to be one of those top 4 seeds, and the Big Ten champion is going to go to the Rose Bowl. So if Ohio State wins the Big Ten championship here in Indianapolis in December, they will move on to the quarterfinal round, and they will play in the Rose Bowl, basically, period, full stop. What's interesting there is Georgia's the SEC champion, whoever the SEC champion is, but if Georgia's the SEC champion, I'm sure Georgia would rather play in the Peach Bowl, but the SEC champion is contractually tied to the Sugar Bowl. So I asked him, and he said, well, I guess in that scenario, they would go to the Sugar Bowl. Now, Big 12 champion, I believe, is also contractually tied to the Sugar Bowl, so maybe they could kind of do a little bit of a workaround there. That was certainly one thing that was interesting. The other thing that I thought was interesting talking to him was when, we have gone through these scenarios, and there's a scenario where Ohio State is playing Texas in the Cotton Bowl, which is rather famously located in Texas, in the semifinal round, if the bracket plays out that way. And, that would obviously be a pretty substantial disadvantage. The answer on that was, if you're the top seed, they will kind of look ahead and, adjust that matchup. So if it's like Ohio State and Texas are, on pace, on a path to potentially play in that semifinal matchup, and the choices this year are the Cotton Bowl and the Orange Bowl, they would assign Ohio State, Ohio State's side of the bracket. If Ohio State's the number 1, they would go to the Rose Bowl, and then they would go to the Orange Bowl in that case. If they were going to play Miami somehow, then obviously they would put that potentially in the Cotton Bowl.
Well, I mean, you don't want to put the number 1 seed at a disadvantage. Mm-hmm. Is playing Miami in Miami actually a disadvantage? Is playing UCLA or USC in the Rose Bowl a disadvantage?
Yeah, I mean, and the first round is contractual for the next couple of years. So even if they were going to somehow play USC or UCLA
the quarterfinal.
In the quarterfinal round, yes, that would be.
the Rose Bowl came out today saying they want to stay in
Yes.
that quarterfinal round January 1st so that the
Mhm.
parade doesn't have to move anything. So they will gleefully bow out of any
Mhm.
type of semifinal action.
Yes. So a couple interesting little pieces of information there on the college football playoff. Again, this is all the stuff that people are like, why are you asking these stupid minutia kind of questions? It's like, well, because we're going to get asked a question in October about, well, what happens if, and it's like, well, now we have gone directly to the source and gotten the answer. So that's a lot of what this week is about.
Well, another one, Kirk Ferentz,
Mhm.
he was talking about the technology. We
Mhm.
touched on that a little bit. The tablets on the sideline, he said he loves it, and it's great that college football has finally caught up with high school football. So, and he comes from the NFL where they would have photos, they'd print out the photos and they'd have that. He does think it's going to be a little bit more, maybe too much information with video. Like photos, it's very boom, boom, boom. You can see it. But it's going to be a huge help on the sidelines for the players. And I'm fascinated to see how all that works. You'll be on the sidelines and they're all going to be huddled around their iPads. And it's a brave new world as we move into the tablets that the kids love, nowadays that the 3-year-olds grow up with. Now the 20-year-olds get them.
Everyone's screen time only going to go up at this college football. The children are supposed to be outside getting fresh air and exercise and playing football,
both.
and now it's going to be screen time too.
Can't even go outside and not be on your tablet.
Shameful. One thing that not exactly a college football tradition, but definitely old school, Wrigley Field. We talked to some of the Northwestern players on Tuesday about having played in Wrigley Field and how cool that was, and how different that is in terms of game day kind of stuff. Iowa players also played there. They did not they did not have all Chicago people necessarily who grew up as Cubs fans and had that whole experience. So you got a chance to talk to some of the Kirk Ferentz and a couple of the Iowa players about that. What were their thoughts on playing in Wrigley Field?
Well, talking to Jay Higgins, linebacker, he said that I think the answer is it's a baseball stadium, not a football field, and playing on the infield there, we're not doing baseball moves. We're doing football moves, and you can't move people very well on the diamond. And so the footing was not great. Kirk Ferentz said the same thing. The footing was not great on that field. So those are some things real world concerns. But conditions at Northwestern have famously been wonky over the years.
Iffy? Yeah.
So, but it was interesting. They had to play when players are on the same sideline. Everybody's on one sideline. Talked to Cam Porter, the Northwestern running back, yesterday. He said he was told they'll be on opposite sidelines, so that will be a help. But yeah, the footing is not great. But the old school building they loved. And Quinn Schulte, I asked him how he's defensive back for Iowa. How familiar were you with the building? And he's like, well, they told us about it. You kids today.
What country did you grow up in? Certainly not America, sir.
Did you not grow up with WGN? No. You grew up with the WB. I don't know.
Yeah, that's
UPN.
UPN. Kids today with their UPN, their WB, and their tablets. I don't know, Tony. I just don't know. It was interesting that when the teams were on on the same sideline, which sounds like it might not be the case this year, but when they were on the same sideline, there were issues with almost like a hockey line change during the second period, where you've kind of got the long change, and if the puck gets stuck in one end, it's hard to get off the ice. Well, if the it's harder to substitute if you are on one end of the field and the ball's down the other end. If the offense subs, then the defense gets the chance to sub. But if the defense wants to sub and the offense, that can be a harder thing to do.
Well, and fortunately, when talking to Jay Higgins about that, he said that when they were down by, on the Northwestern side, Northwestern would sometimes throw a tight end in, and one of another linebacker would have to come in because they'll play a 4-2-5. Another linebacker would have to come running from 25 yards away. Fortunately, they hold the time a little bit, but you've got to be on your toes, and it's an interesting situation. If you ever see it, just look up a picture of Google Iowa Northwestern Wrigley Field, and you'll see the setup. And there's a lot of open space, but then they're all kind of crammed in. He did say, though, that later on after that game down the road, he did go to a baseball game at Wrigley, and he was sitting in the stands thinking, how in the world did they get a football field in here?
I had the same thought. I went to a game there a couple of years ago, and you look, and it's like, I guess maybe I don't. Yeah, I'm guessing I'm not going to have the luxury of standing behind the end zone in at least one end of the field because I don't think there's a lot of space there, and if someone does come running into you and bumps into you, you're going to get bumped directly into a brick wall, which seems not ideal. This was also the first impressions for a couple of LA schools here at Big Ten Media Days. Lincoln Riley was asked about the famous picture that he tweeted about his brisket a couple of years ago, and the brisket looked like it was, well done-ish, and it got a lot of scorn and derision. He said his barbecue skills are fine; it's his photography skills that were lacking in that case. He was also asked about the USC Notre Dame rivalry and the fact that could be going away. They are still playing this year, but that right now is the last game of the season. USC hosting Notre Dame. USC has a difficult slate this year. This is not an easy schedule for them. And then you also have Notre Dame on there. And it was, he didn't say it's definitely going away. We are definitely getting rid of that thing. But it was the kind of answer that was like, well, a lot of games, traditional rivalries have been casualties of college football expansion. Notre Dame has lost some of those. And, I think that's one of those things that the ACC, they have their ACC scheduling agreement right now, but they start to lose some of those. You wonder if that might push them, if and when there's an ACC implosion/explosion, push them even closer to the Big Ten in some way or fashion.
Well, if you lose USC, you lose perhaps the opportunity to play FSU, Clemson in the ACC. The rest of the ACC is not enough of a draw necessarily, unless you're playing Miami twice, two times a year, that sort of thing.
Catholics versus convicts, versus convicts 2.
Exactly.
Electric Boogaloo. Yes.
So I think there's some strategic. Should the Big Ten start to freeze and not just start, but should they have been freezing Notre Dame out? I think that's been a conversation. There's no way LSU or USC is going to continue this. There's no reason to for that.
Right. The way he said it was one of those very diplomatic, like, well, that's a decision that's going to get made above my pay grade, but
that's when you tell your kids, we'll see.
Yeah, right. Yeah. No. Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Lincoln Riley is going to turn this car around unless you join the Big Ten, sirs. Yeah, it is one, and you go through the list of the great college football rivalries that have gotten kind of kicked to the curb over the years. And, the backyard brawl and the border war and, Texas A&M, which went away and now is coming back, and Michigan Notre Dame. I mean, there are a million of them. And, that is sort of the price of modern college football. There's going to be some cool stuff this fall. There's going to be some stuff that you will miss this fall, but definitely going to be a memorable season. And it's going to be a memorable season for all of us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. That is where Tony, Kevin, and I cover the team. Mark covers recruiting. Got our whole team of X's and O's gurus, making you a smarter football fan. It's all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Have some sort of early access to some of the season preview shows that we're doing here in Indianapolis. Had some really, really good, interesting conversations. Had a great conversation with Aaron McMahon from the Ann Arbor News and MLive.com, all about Michigan. Asked him, what is the perception right now in Ann Arbor of, what's going to happen when the NCAA notice of allegations drops? And so really, really interesting conversation with a guy whose work I really respect. I've followed him for years, and it was a great conversation. So you can find all that on the Huddle board presented by Jeff Ruby Steakhouse, all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. We hope to see you there. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.